Hello. I'd like to read you a few stories that I wrote about a trip we made to the Indian Ocean some years ago. Do you fancy going to Christmas Island? Asked Mary, while my nose was buried deep in a book. What? I murmured. Christmas cards already. It's only June. No, no, dopey. Christmas Island. There's a trip going to Christmas Island, she said, a tad more assertively, causing me to pay closer attention. I don't need to go to Christmas Island, I explained. That nice Mr. Ruddock gave me my Aussie citizenship in exchange for spending 10 years of my working life in Mount Isa. A fair deal, I thought. Listen, Skeldo, there's a bird watching trip to Christmas Island, and they're asking for interested birdos like us to spot and identify some of the rare and unusual birds that live there. There's also a side trip to Cocos Islands. Well, I have to say, my curiosity was sparked, as I have a passing amateur interest in ornithology, not to mention a passion for travel to odd destinations. First thing to do is to find out where Christmas Island and Cocos Islands are. And then we can figure out how to get there. Turning to my trusty reference tool, Google, I tapped in Christmas Island. Thus I learned that Christmas Island is situated 2 degrees north of the equator and one of the islands that make up the nation of Kiribati in the Central Pacific. That can't be right, said Mary. Why would asylum seekers trying to get from Indonesia to Australia end up in the centre of the Pacific? I read on and found there are two Christmas Islands. One is a coral atoll in Kiribati in the Pacific, the other an Australian external territory in the Indian Ocean. I was only 8,000 kilometres in error. Our Christmas Island is about 2,600 kilometres from Perth and is 10 degrees south of the equator. I wasn't even in the correct hemisphere. It's only 360 kilometres from Java. The island has a wide range of birds and is home of the Christmas Island red crab, whose annual migrations are legendary. I turned to Mary. I suppose the next thing you'll tell me is that there are two Cocos Islands as well. Yes, she replied smugly, there are. I popped over to Yeppoon Library and had a look at a 1960s edition of the Australian Encyclopedia, which tells us that our Cocos Keeling Islands are two coral atolls in the Indian Ocean, halfway between Perth and Colombo, Sri Lanka. Altogether, the cluster of 25 or so tiny islands make up this most distant of Australian possessions. Charles Darwin paid a visit on the Beagle in 1836 and observed that none of the atolls is more than 6 metres above sea level. I suspect the elevation is even less these days, but we shall see. How would we get to these far-off islands? There appear to be two choices: fly west across Australia to Perth and catch a Virgin flight to the island outposts. Alternatively, head north to Jakarta and onward to Christmas Island and Cocos. We decided to book flights from Rocky to Brisbane and on to Perth for a few days before embarking for the islands. Cocos Islands were first sighted by Captain William Keeling of the East India Company in 1608. Hence they are known as Cocos, and in brackets Keeling Islands, to distinguish them from the other similarly named locations. Later, in 1827, Shetlander John Clunies Ross settled on the main atoll, Home Island, with his family and some labourers. Oddly, Clunies Ross's brother showed up with a harem of 40 Malay women and also settled there. This was not to John's liking, and a family feud ensued. Late in the 19th century, Queen Victoria granted the islands to the Clunies Ross family in perpetuity. As was customary in the early days of the British Empire, sovereignty of the islands was handed around between the Straits Settlement, Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, eventually ended up as part of Singapore. Cocos Keeling saw action in World War I when HMAS Sydney engaged the German cruiser Emden, which was trying to destroy the cable and wireless installation. Sydney prevailed and set the cruiser alight, forcing her to beach. The islands were a British and Allied garrison during World War II. By 1955, the islands came under Australian control, and remain an external Australian territory to this day. This situation caused some unhappiness with the Clooney's Ross family, some of whom still live on Cocos. We set off next time.